What's up guys, this is Mr. Asian Pie. In the late 1990s to early 2000s, Michael Jackson would host or attend several smaller scale concerts and events. The smaller events were testing grounds for a series of much larger comeback tours which would occur later in the decade. One of these sets of smaller concerts would be held in New York City. On September 7th, Michael Jackson would take a flight from his home in Neverland Ranch and land in the Big Apple. That evening, he would host his first and slightly larger of the two events at Madison Square Garden. For the weekend, he would go around town, attending smaller events and going through some business transactions and just generally enjoying himself in the city. On Monday, he performed his second concert, which went off without a hitch. The show wrapped up and Michael went to his hotel room for the night. He was probably looking to get some good sleep, as he had a busy day ahead on the following Tuesday. He needed to return a $2 million watch, which he used as a prop in the concert, and adhere to some personal business with a woman named Elizabeth Taylor, who was a VIP at the event of the night before. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on the context, Michael's family phoned in, and had a conversation which continued into the early hours of the next day. Due to this call, Michael would oversleep, failing to attend his scheduled duties in the morning, and also escaping New York with his life. You see, the meeting place for the planned transactions was going to be the World Trade Center. There is a world not too far from here where the 80s superstar would have been the highest profile victim in the deadliest terrorist attack in history. Now, I'm not going to pretend like this story is obscure in any way. It's very well documented, and MJ himself hosted a charity concert as a response to the attacks and the fact he almost died. Though another high-profile case who could have been a potential victim would have been Seth MacFarlane, the creator of Family Guy. Alright, so I shouldn't really say high profile. Nowadays, Seth MacFarlane's the world's largest douchebag who isn't obese and British. But back in 2001, Seth was nothing more than a glorified nobody. His flagship show and magnum opus in the field of media, being Family Guy, was airing its third season to piss-poor ratings. Fox was getting fed up, and season 4, which was still in production, was about to turn into lost media. His life really was worse than the time he almost died in the 9/11 terror attacks. According to Seth in a 2011 interview in CNN, he was doing college lectures on Monday, September 10th, and at the end of the day, he decided to go out drinking with some faculty. This led him to being late to his scheduled flight the next morning. He ended up rescheduling and taking a nap. He woke up 45 minutes later, and as he described,
45 minutes later to a commotion, and the first plane had hit, and sat there and watched the second plane hit, and they announced what flight it was, and I turned to the guy next to me and said, my God, that was the flight I was supposed to be on. I was late. I missed it.
What a harrowing tale, except for the fact that Seth made it up. There's no evidence or corroboration to back up his recounting of the events told. Prior to the infamous CNN interview, which every tabloid magazine sources, there is no mention of the story anywhere. No one has since come forward to expand upon the story, or even confirm that Seth was lecturing at a Boston college on Monday, September 10th. Let's compare this to Michael Jackson's story, as both are about famous people who escape with their lives due to oversleeping. We can confirm the activities the King of Pop was doing in the days leading up to the attack. Michael's concert was frontline news on Good Morning America that fateful September morning. On the other hand, there is no documentation of Seth lecturing at a college, as he claims. In Michael's story, we know that there was a call between him and his mother thanks to Jermaine Jackson. Jermaine also recounted a second call Michael made to his mother, reaffirming that he was alive and well. We even know what he told his mother, Katherine Jackson. Quote, "Mother, I'm okay, thanks to you. You kept me talking so late that I overslept and missed my appointment." We don't have any details that are like this in Seth's story. The closest we get to anything specific is that he asked a bartender for a shot following the realization that he just spared his life. Just out of the kindness of his heart, the bartender gave the shot on the house, which is oddly convenient because if Seth paid, we would at least have some proof that he was at the airport via monetary transaction. But the most damning evidence against Seth MacFarlane's story comes from a partially declassified document from the FBI published on September 23rd of 2001. From the document, we are given on a silver platter an in-depth analysis of everyone who purchased tickets, canceled flights, and boarded each of the hijacked planes. And guess what? On page 41, second to last row, Seth MacFarlane, seat 3B, cancel reservation, September 11th, 2001, 6:34 a.m. So what about that whole story about oversleeping? Seth, you lying fuck! And before you say, oh, he was just late to boarding his flight, that's not true. At earliest, Flight 11 started boarding at 7:10 a.m. Either way you look at it, both of Seth's possible timelines just don't make sense. The more charitable and more likely timeline is that if Seth called in to cancel his flight. Then that brings up the issue of why he was at Logan International Airport at 8 a.m. to miss a flight he canceled his reservation on anyways. If he showed up in person to cancel his flight, what motive would be behind the move? He's already at the airport and he would have been able to catch the flight on time without issue. His reschedule was at 11, meaning that he had 4 hours to just dick around. Maybe I'm the stupid one, but this logic just doesn't make any fucking sense. Compound this with the fact that it's Logan International, which is right next to downtown Boston, not like Hartsfield-Jackson or O'Hare where the downtown is a distant memory. I don't know, I just find it really hard to believe that if he canceled in person, Seth went to the airport at 6 a.m., an hour before his original flight started boarding, rescheduled his flight for 11 and decided, I'm gonna just fuck around for 4 hours and wait for the earliest possible time to board my reschedule. I get it, people get to the airport early, but this rescheduling was pre-TSA, factor in Seth being a single traveler, and he canceled an entire hour before his original flight started boarding. Meaning that Seth likely already made up his mind that he was going to leave later in the day. So yeah, I think you're bullshitting, Seth. The lack of prior mentions of the story, the lack of evidence, and the timeline just not making sense. And I'm not even a truther or anything. Out of all the conspiracies to believe, most 9/11 related ones are just plain stupid. For example, a lot of truthers like to point out the Empire State Building as proof of why the World Trade Centers should not have collapsed. You see, back in 1945, a B-25 wrecked itself into the 79th floor of the Empire State Building. Ultimately, 14 people would lose their lives, but the tower would still stand another day. But here's the thing. These retards are comparing literal apples to heroin needles. Starting off with the plane, the B-25 is 53 feet long, 16 feet tall, and most importantly has a wingspan of 67 feet. American Airlines Flight 11 and United 175 were 159 feet long, 52 feet tall, and had a wingspan of 156 feet. Not to mention that the fuel tank levels were almost full in both 767s, and at impact they were going over twice the maximum speed of B-25 can only dream of going! Then you have to factor in the structural differences of the Empire State Building and World Trade Centers. You see, the Empire State Building was still a pioneer in skyscraper technology, and at the time we still had a very primitive understanding of blow distribution and wind force. So to be safe, the Starrett brothers overbuilt the frame of the building, which also contains an internal structure, which means a lot of columns. In comparison, the World Trade Centers were designed to host as many tenants as possible, so had open floor plans. How did they achieve this then? Well, the exterior walls of the World Trade Centers were the only load-bearing walls and the only thing holding the buildings up. They were basically giant soda cans. While there was an internal structure in the World Trade Center, it was bare bones and only held up elevators and a couple utilities. So, what does this all mean? While a 67-foot wide B-25 going approximately 250 miles into a 175-foot wide Empire State Building would cause a lot of damage, the load bearing can easily shift onto an internal frame. You can take out a couple columns, but the superstructure as a whole is fine. You crash a 156-foot wide 767 into a 208-foot wide World Trade Center, ripping into its only load-bearing walls at twice the speed, and add to that no internal structure to be able to shift the weight to. Compound that with a fire being fed by paper and a continental trip's worth of jet fuel, weakening the superstructure. What the fuck do you think is gonna happen? And then you have all these brainlets pointing out the fact that the Twin Towers were designed to withstand the impact of a 747, as if that means anything! That's like being shot down by an F-35 because you thought your fighter jet could go toe-to-toe with it because your plane can outperform an F-16. Oh yeah, what was I talking about again? Oh yeah, Seth MacFarlane. Seth, until you give a legitimate, airtight story or someone else corroborates on your recounting, I think you're full of shit. And I don't know if it's just me, but I believe that the majority of people think that it's kind of scummy to lie about being a potential victim of the worst terrorist attack in human history just for a 2-minute segment on CNN. I could be wrong, but you need to prove it. This has been Mr. Asian Pie. See you on the flip, and don't be stupid.